The man across from Tae Yee was crying now, mascara from the blood on his face streaking down in thin, dark rivers. Tae Yee felt nothing. He'd felt nothing for years, maybe longer than he could honestly remember. The VVIP balcony of the Neon Lotus in Itaewon was his temporary kingdom. Velvet shadows, the burn of imported whiskey, and the particular scent of desperation that clung to places like this, places where people came to forget, or to be forgotten. His lieutenants held the walls like statues in expensive suits, waiting for the word that would end this man's evening, or his life. Tae Yee leaned forward. Slow. Deliberate. His platinum blonde hair caught the low red lighting, and the Hangul characters tattooed vertically down his neck shifted like living ink, the Baekho Syndicate's blood oath, carved into his skin at 16. I will die for the Brotherhood. I will live inside honor. I don't make threats twice, he said softly. The man across from Tae Yee had stopped begging 10 minutes ago. That was usually when things got worse. But tonight, the music changed. A spotlight cut through the smoke below. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the white tiger of the Baekho Syndicate, a man who had never lost his nerve, not once, not under interrogation or gunfire or the weight of things he'd done and couldn't undo, lost his nerve. Her name was Patricia Patrick. She had 5 stars on her neck and a debt that was eating her alive. He had an oath tattooed into his throat and a kingdom built on other people's fear. This is the story of what happened when neither of them could look away. Heavy bass rolled through the floor like a warning. A spotlight tore open the smoky dark below. Tae Yee barely registered the shift, until something he couldn't name forced his eyes down to the stage. Then he saw her. And the word for what happened next wasn't attraction. It wasn't even desire. It was recognition. Patricia didn't perform. She commanded. Where the other dancers worked the room, eyes soft, movements shaped around what men wanted to see, she moved like a woman conducting a private war, and the audience was merely an audience. Her dark auburn hair was pinned into a razor-sharp low bun, and her dark skin didn't just catch the neon stage lights. It absorbed them, converted them, gave them back as something richer than the club deserved. And her neck. 5 hollow stars tattooed down the column of her throat, not decorative, not delicate. They mapped something. A constellation that looked like it had been placed there not by a needle, but by survival itself. Her delicate nose ring caught a strobe flash as she turned, a single point of light on a woman made entirely of controlled fire. Then she tilted her head. And she looked up. Direct. Unafraid. Their eyes met across the divide between predator and prey, between a man who owned every room he entered and a woman who refused to be owned by any of them, and the impenetrable ice that had lived in Tae Yee's chest since the night he first killed for the Baekho Syndicate cracked straight through the center. His entire world collapsed to a single, devastating truth. He was no longer in control. And for the first time in 10 years, that didn't terrify him. It felt like relief. This is the story of Patricia Patrick and Tae Yee, the black expatriate who danced to buy back her freedom, and the white tiger underboss who burned his empire to the ground to be worthy of her stars. Before we watch Seoul's most dangerous man kneel for the first time in his life, make sure you're subscribed, this is your sign, because you need to see exactly where this goes. Share this with someone who loves intense Korean crime drama stories. And tell me below, what time is it where you're watching from and what country are you in? Let's finish this. The bass still thrummed. But all Tae Yee heard now was the sound of something inside him that had been silent for a decade, suddenly breathing again. The man whose face was still bleeding looked between Tae Yee and the stage, sensing the atmospheric shift. His lieutenants exchanged the kind of careful, sideways glances men exchange when their general has suddenly stopped seeing the battlefield. Their boss, the man who had orchestrated the Sinchan collection without raising his voice, who moved through Seoul's underworld like a scalpel through silk, was staring at the stage like something had struck him from the inside. Daejun Nim? His right-hand man, Ryu Suk, ventured the title carefully, each syllable treated like it might explode. Tae Yee didn't answer. He watched Patricia finish her set with that same warrior's economy, no wasted movement, no performance for the watching men. He watched her collect the scattered bills from the stage with businesslike precision, as if money were simply fuel and she was simply refueling. He watched the black velvet curtain swallow her whole. The moment she was gone, the room felt smaller. "Find out everything about her," Tae Yee said. His voice came out rough at the edges in a way Ryu Suk had never heard before. Name. Age. Nationality. Her debt situation. Why she's in Seoul. Why she's here. Daejun Nim, we still have, Ryu Suk gestured at the bleeding man. Everything. The word dropped into the room like a blade point first into a table. Her life story. On my desk before the city wakes up. Ryu Suk bowed and disappeared. The debtor looked at Tae Yee with the cautious hope of a man who recognizes that his executioner has been briefly distracted. About the payment timeline. Get out. Tae Yee didn't look at him. You have 72 hours. Don't make me say it again. The balcony cleared in under 30 seconds. Tae Yee stayed in the velvet dark, alone, staring at the empty stage where she had stood. He lifted one hand and traced the characters inked down the side of his own throat, the oath he had never questioned, not once, not in 10 years of blood and discipline and absolute, consuming loyalty to the Baekho Syndicate. I will die for the Brotherhood. I will live inside honor. He had no idea, standing there in the red-lit dark of the neon lotus, that the woman with stars on her neck was about to make him question every word. Tae Yee's private office occupied the upper floor of a Gangnam tower that the Baekho Syndicate officially had no connection to. Panoramic glass wrapped the room on 3 sides, framing Seoul the way a painting frames its subject, like the city existed purely to be looked at, assessed, and ultimately controlled. He had stood at those panels for almost 6 hours, watching the city burn through neon chaos and exhaust itself into the blue-gray quiet of approaching dawn. His phone buzzed at 5:53 a.m. Ryu Suk entered without knocking, the only man alive with permission to do so, and set a slim folder on the table. Daejun Nim. The report. Tae Yee took the folder expecting the architecture of tragedy he had read 100 times. The story that funneled women into places like the Neon Lotus followed a familiar blueprint: poverty, an impossible debt, a man who'd failed them, and a city that had stopped caring. He'd read it so many times it had stopped being people. It had become just a pattern. He opened the folder. What he read instead made him pull out a chair and sit down slowly, not because he was tired, but because the weight of what he was reading had shifted something structural in his chest. Her name was Patricia Patrick. She was American. She had come to Seoul not running from something, but running toward something, a deadline, a debt that wasn't even hers. A father's medical bills, astronomical and merciless, transferred to a daughter who had never stopped fighting for a man who could no longer fight for himself. She wasn't broken. She was in the middle of an endurance test she hadn't chosen, and she was passing it. Tae Yee closed the folder. Set it down. Looked out at the city she was somewhere inside of right now, sleeping, maybe, or awake and calculating, running the numbers against a clock that didn't care about her. His jaw tightened. He reached for his phone and dialed his corporate liaison. I want the Neon Lotus, he said when the line connected. Full acquisition. Shell Corporation, clean trail. I want it done before she goes back on that stage. Her father's name had been Cornelius Patrick. Tae Yee read it twice, not because he'd missed it, but because the man suddenly felt real to him. Not a footnote in a debt file. A person. A father who had spent the last 14 months of his life in a Chicago hospital room running up a bill that the American healthcare system had waited, with patient, institutional cruelty, for him to die before presenting. The total figure was printed in clean, indifferent font at the top of the collections notice Ryu Suk had somehow obtained by 4 a.m. Tae Yee looked at the number for a long moment. Then he set the page down and stood. Seoul was burning gold outside the glass now, the Han River catching the early light like hammered metal. The city looked clean from up here. It always looked clean from up here. That was the lie altitude told, that the things happening at street level, in the clubs and the back offices and the debt collection agencies operating out of Itaewon storefronts, that none of that had weight. That none of it was grinding specific people into specific floors. Patricia Patrick, 26, had been wiring money home every month since her father's diagnosis 2 years ago. She had a bachelor's degree in business administration from a university in Atlanta that Tae Yee had never heard of and clearly had not helped her. She had come to Seoul on an E-2 teaching visa, switched to an entertainment work permit 18 months ago, and was now 4 weeks from a collections deadline that would trigger an automatic visa delinquency flag with Korean immigration. If she missed the deadline, she would be deported. She wasn't dancing because she had nothing left. She was dancing because she had calculated, with the precision of a woman running out of every other option, that it was the fastest legal route to a number large enough to matter. Tae Yee turned from the window. He'd been disgusted before, by rivals, by betrayals, by the particular ugliness men revealed when they thought no one powerful was watching. But this was a different species of disgust. Quiet. Cold. The kind that didn't heat his blood. It settled into his bones instead, heavy and still. The Neon Lotus was making money off her deadline. Every man in that VVIP balcony last night, every hand that had reached, every voice that had called out, was a participant in the same architecture. The club didn't care about her debt. It cared that the debt kept her walking through that back entrance every night, kept her dependent, kept her there. Tae Yee picked up his phone. "Get me Park Jin-soo," he said when Ryu Suk answered. "The corporate one, not the lawyer." "Daejun Nim, it's just past 6. I know what time it is." He looked out at the gold-washed city. "Tell him I want the Neon Lotus. Full acquisition. He has until noon." He ended the call before Ryu Suk could respond. Outside, Seoul glittered, indifferent and enormous. Somewhere inside it, Patricia Patrick was sleeping, or not sleeping, running the same numbers against the same merciless clock. Not for much longer, Tae Yee thought. He had no idea he was about to make everything worse. Patricia noticed the bouncers first. The usual pair, Dae-won, who smelled like cigarettes and always let his eyes linger too long, and the one she privately nicknamed Neck Tattoo, who wasn't worth remembering by any other name, were gone. In their place stood 2 men in charcoal suits so well-fitted they looked architectural. They didn't leer. They didn't speak. They simply existed in the doorway like load-bearing walls with good posture, and something about their particular stillness made Patricia's stomach tighten as she walked past. The club smelled different. That was the second thing. The Neon Lotus had always carried a specific scent, spilled liquor, synthetic fog machine smoke, and underneath it all, the particular staleness of a room that had absorbed too many bad decisions over too many years. Tonight it smelled of industrial cleaning product and something faintly expensive. The bar had been restocked. The ripped velvet on the far booth had been replaced. Even the lighting felt different, still neon, still red and gold, but calibrated somehow. Like someone had decided the chaos needed edges. Manager O was sweating through his collar when he gathered them in the back corridor before the first set. "New ownership as of this morning," he said, without making eye contact with anyone. He held his phone like a shield. "Effective immediately, fixed monthly salary, same rate for all performers. The number is generous." He read it aloud. A few of the dancers exhaled. One of them, Yuna, actually pressed her hand to her chest. Patricia did the math in 4 seconds and felt the floor shift beneath her. "VIP private bookings are suspended," O continued. "Indefinitely. House policy going forward is hands-off, enforced." He glanced toward the door, where one of the suited men was visible in the corridor. "No exceptions." The room murmured with something that sounded like relief. Patricia said nothing. She performed 3 sets that night to the most orderly crowd the Neon Lotus had ever produced. The suited men positioned near the stage didn't need to intervene once, their presence alone restructured the room's behavior. No reaching hands. No shouted requests. No folded bills slid across the stage with accompanying suggestions about what the tip might purchase. It was the safest she had ever felt in this building. It was also a financial catastrophe. She stood in the dressing room afterward, still in costume, doing the arithmetic on the back of a receipt because she needed to see it written down to believe it. Fixed salary. No VIP cuts. No tips. The deadline was 26 days out. The number she needed and the number she would now earn existed in two completely different universes. Patricia set the receipt down on the mirror's edge and stared at her own reflection for a long moment, the stars on her neck, the low bun, the careful face she had trained to reveal nothing. Someone had cleaned this cage. Polished it. Padded it. Staffed it with professionals. It was still a cage. She didn't ask for directions to the VVIP balcony. She'd worked this building long enough to know its architecture by instinct, every back corridor, every service staircase, every door that management preferred the performers pretend didn't exist. She took the stairs two at a time, still in her stage costume, her low bun beginning to unravel at the edges from 3 sets and the particular fury that had been building in her chest since Manager O's announcement the night before. The suited man at the balcony entrance put out one arm. Patricia looked at it. Then at him. "Move," she said. Something in her voice must have carried weight he hadn't expected from a woman in stage heels, because he hesitated, and in that hesitation, she walked past him. Tae Yee was seated at the far end of the balcony, jacket on, a glass of something untouched on the table beside him. He had been watching the stage, she realized. Watching her. The knowledge landed like a coal in her stomach. He looked up when she entered, and something moved briefly across his face, not surprise, exactly. More like a man who had been waiting for a specific weather pattern and was now watching it arrive. "Ms. Patrick. Don't." The word came out clean and hard. She crossed the distance between them and stopped close enough that looking down at her required actual effort on his part. "You bought this club." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. That was its own answer. "You pulled the VIP bookings. You capped the wage." She held up the receipt she'd been carrying since last night, the numbers visible in the low light. "Do you see this? This is the difference between what I needed to earn and what your fixed salary allows. In 25 days, I lose my visa. In 25 days, I get deported back to a country where a collections agency is waiting to garnish every dollar I make for the next decade." Tae Yee's gaze dropped to the receipt. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You didn't protect me," Patricia said. "You just made sure I fail quietly." "That wasn't," he stopped. Started again. "The men in this club were my problem to manage." Her voice didn't rise. It did something more unsettling, it sharpened. "I have been managing men in rooms like this since before you decided I needed saving. I know which ones to avoid. I know which ones to redirect. I know how to work a room and walk out with my dignity and my money intact." She pointed to the stars on her neck, her finger steady. "You see these? I put them there to remind myself that I navigate my own way out of the dark. I don't need someone else to turn off all the lights and call it safety." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture. Tae Yee sat very still. He was a man who controlled rooms through the precise management of his own stillness, who understood that silence, wielded correctly, was its own form of pressure. But the silence he was sitting in now was not his. She had built it around him. He looked at the receipt. At her neck. At the expression on her face that was not asking for anything, not sympathy, not negotiation, not permission. She was informing him. And for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, the full weight of the Baekho Syndicate behind him felt like exactly nothing. In the Baekho Syndicate, weakness was not something you confessed. It was something your enemies discovered, and the speed at which they moved once they found it told you exactly how long they'd been watching. They had been watching Tae Yee for 11 days. He learned this later, reconstructing the timeline with the cold precision of a man cataloging his own mistakes. The night he'd lingered in the VVIP balcony after Patricia left the stage. The morning he'd called Park Jin-soo before the city was fully awake. The acquisition of the Neon Lotus, which he'd routed through 2 shell corporations but which had still, apparently, left a thread visible to the right kind of eyes. The Jeonmungam faction had very good eyes. Ryu Suk delivered the intelligence on a Tuesday morning with the careful expression of someone defusing something. "They've been making inquiries," he said. "Into the American woman. Her visa status. Her debt situation." A pause. The overseas debt, the American collections account, it was acquired 3 days ago through a Seoul-registered financial proxy. Tae Yee set down his coffee. "They bought her debt," he said. "Through 4 subsidiary layers. Legally clean." Ryu Suk placed a single document on the table. "The contact came through the usual back channel this morning." The message was brief, as threats from intelligent men tended to be. The Jeonmungam leadership had no interest in the Neon Lotus, no interest in the woman personally, and no interest in unnecessary conflict. They were simply, the phrasing was almost courteous, concerned business partners who had acquired a distressed financial asset and were prepared to exercise all available legal remedies against the debtor, up to and including formal notification to Korean immigration authorities regarding visa delinquency. Unless, of course, Tae Yee wished to discuss the transfer of his 3 most profitable Gangnam distribution corridors. They had given him 72 hours to respond. Tae Yee read the message twice. Folded it. Set it down with a steadiness that required more effort than it looked like. They had not touched her. They had not threatened her physically. They had simply picked up the same financial machinery that was already grinding her down and pointed it with greater precision. It was, he recognized with a cold, furious clarity, an exceptionally intelligent move. Patricia's debt was not a weapon they had manufactured. It was one she'd been carrying for 2 years, they had simply purchased the handle. She found the notice slipped under her apartment door that evening. It was printed on formal letterhead, a Seoul financial services company she had never heard of, registered in Mapogu. It informed her, in clean bilingual Korean and English, that her outstanding medical debt had been acquired from the American Collections Agency and transferred to their domestic portfolio effective immediately. All payment obligations remained unchanged. However, given her current earnings trajectory, they were initiating a formal review of her visa-linked financial compliance status. Patricia read it standing in her doorway, coat still on, keys still in her hand. She read it again. Then she sat down on the floor of her hallway, not because her legs gave out, but because sitting felt like the only honest response to what she was holding. The stars on her neck felt very far away from any sky worth navigating toward. She had 22 days left. And now the darkness had learned her name. He did not call a council meeting. He did not consult the Baekho Grand Boss, did not route the decision through the syndicate's careful hierarchy of approvals and protocols that existed precisely to prevent individual underbosses from making unilateral moves that could ignite faction wars. He did not send a counteroffer through the back channel. He did not negotiate. Tae Yee looked at the 72-hour deadline the Jeonmungam had given him, and he let it expire. Then he called Ryu Suk and gave him a list of names. The Incheon port warehouse was registered to a seafood import company that had never processed a single kilogram of seafood. The Jeonmungam used it for exactly the kind of business that required loading dock access, salt air to neutralize certain smells, and the ambient noise of container ships to absorb everything else. They had 4 men on the outer perimeter, 2 at the secondary entrance, and their faction's 3 senior leadership figures inside, assembled, Tae Yee's intelligence suggested, to await his surrender response in person. They had clearly expected a phone call. They got Tae Yee instead. It was over in less than 9 minutes. This was the part that never appeared in the mythology that accumulated around men like him, not the duration, not the specific and terrible efficiency of it, not the way the warehouse's industrial lighting made everything look simultaneously too bright and too unreal. The mythology preferred the aftermath. The reputation. The carefully managed distance between the powerful man and the evidence of what power actually required. Tae Yee did not maintain that distance. He never had. It was, his first syndicate mentor had told him at 17, what separated the white tiger from men who merely played at being dangerous. He moved through the warehouse with ice-cold, methodical precision, no rage, no theater, no unnecessary words. Just the systematic and absolute elimination of every man who had looked at Patricia Patrick's suffering and seen a financial instrument. When it was done, the silence was total. The contracts were in a standard manila envelope in the interior breast pocket of the Jeommungam's senior liaison, a meticulous man, apparently, even in his criminal paperwork. Tae Yee retrieved it with bruised hands and a ruined jacket, the charcoal fabric beyond the reach of any dry cleaner now. He stood in the warehouse doorway, the cold salt air coming off the port in long, flat waves, and opened the envelope. He checked each document against Ryu Suk's intelligence file. The debt purchase agreement. The collections transfer. The visa compliance notification filed with immigration. All of it. Every page. He sealed the envelope. Outside, container ships moved through the dark water with slow, indifferent enormity, carrying their cargo toward destinations that didn't know or care what had just happened in the warehouse behind him. Tae Yee walked to the car. He believed, with complete and genuine conviction, that he was holding Patricia Patrick's freedom in his hands. That the blood drying on his cuffs was the price freedom sometimes required, and that a woman strong enough to navigate by stars would understand the arithmetic of survival when she saw it. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. He chose Namsan because it was neutral ground. No syndicate associations, no Itaewon shadows, no Gangnam architecture carrying the weight of everything he was inside it. Just the mountain, the tower burning red against the night sky, and the city spread below like a circuit board running every possible version of human ambition simultaneously. He had stood at this overlook exactly once before, at 19, newly sworn into the Baekho Syndicate, looking down at Seoul and understanding for the first time that he had chosen a life without exits. He hadn't thought about that night in years. He thought about it now, waiting, the manila envelope in his interior jacket pocket, his ruined cuffs turned back twice at the wrist. Patricia arrived 12 minutes after Ryu Suk's car dropped her at the path entrance. She walked up the incline alone, coat belted against the cold, and when she came into the light of the overlook she stopped a measured distance from him, close enough for conversation, far enough to make a point. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the VVIP balcony. Like a woman assessing structural damage. "You said it was important," she said. "It is." He reached into his jacket and produced the envelope. Held it out. "It's done." Patricia didn't take it immediately. Her eyes moved from the envelope to his hands, specifically, to his wrists where the cuffs were folded back. The bruising across his knuckles was deep, the kind that didn't come from a single impact. Her gaze traveled up to his face, reading the particular quality of calm that lived there, and something shifted behind her eyes. She took the envelope. She opened it slowly, pulling the documents out with the careful attention of a woman who had been reading financial paperwork for 2 years and understood every word of what she was looking at. The debt purchase agreement. The collections transfer. The immigration filing, stamped and voided. Each page cleared, each obligation dissolved. The wind off the mountain moved the edges of the papers in her hands. "How?" she said. Not a question, exactly. The word had the quality of something she already knew the answer to and was giving him the space to confirm. "It's handled." His voice was even. Certain. The voice of a man who considered the matter closed. The Jeommungam won't be filing anything with immigration. The debt is cleared. You have no more deadline. Patricia looked at his knuckles again. At the precise fold of the cuffs hiding whatever was above them. At the absolute, terrifyingly rational calm in his eyes, the eyes of a man who had done something catastrophic and filed it neatly under necessary. "How many people?" she said quietly. The question landed in the space between them and stayed there. Tae Yee said nothing. Which was its own answer. Patricia looked down at the papers in her hands. Then at the city below, Seoul and its full, glittering, indifferent enormity, 10 million people living 10 million lives inside a skyline that didn't record what happened in waterfront warehouses at night. Her jaw worked once. Her eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "I came to Seoul," she said, and her voice was low and controlled and shaking underneath in a register only someone paying close attention would catch, "to get out from under the weight of a death I didn't choose. My father's death. His debt. His absence." She looked up. "I have been trying for 2 years to build something clean out of something painful. Do you understand that? Clean. Not just financially free. Clean." Tae Yee held her gaze. "You are free. I am covered," she said. "There is a difference." She looked at the documents one last time. At the cleared figures, the voided notices, the paperwork that represented 26 days of impossible arithmetic finally resolved. Everything she had come to Seoul for. Everything she had danced for, budgeted for, sacrificed sleep and comfort and dignity for. She tore them in half. The sound was very clean in the cold air. She tore them again, and then she let go, and the wind took them, white fragments lifting and scattering over the overlook's edge, catching the light from the tower above and the city below, disappearing into the dark between the two. Tae Yee watched them go. Something moved across his face that had no name in the vocabulary he'd been given at 16. "My stars," Patricia said, and she pointed to her neck one final time, her finger steady, "were meant to guide me out of the dark." Her eyes dropped to the Hangul oath tattooed down his throat. "Yours bind you to it." She buttoned the top button of her coat. "Don't contact me," she said. "Don't send Ryu Suk. Don't buy anything else that belongs to me." Her voice didn't break. "It finished. Whatever this was, it's done." She walked back down the path without looking at him again. Tae Yee stood at the overlook alone, the city burning below him, his syndicate oath suddenly feeling less like identity and more like a sentence he had been serving so long he'd forgotten it wasn't the same thing as living. The last fragment of white paper caught an updraft somewhere below the railing and rose briefly, one pale point of light against the dark, before the wind took it somewhere he couldn't follow. The summons came at dawn. No message. Just Ryu Suk in the doorway with an expression that had been carefully emptied of everything except the facts. "Headquarters," he said. "The Grand Boss is waiting." The Baekho Syndicate's true seat of operations occupied the lower floors of a building in Seoul that presented itself to the world as a private wealth management firm. Tae Yee had walked its corridors for 10 years. He knew the specific weight of the silence inside it, the way sound behaved differently in rooms where absolute authority lived. Grand Boss Lim was 71 years old, small in the way of men who had never needed physical size to make a room afraid. He was seated when Tae Yee entered, 2 senior council members flanking him like architecture, and he did not look up from the document on the table immediately. When he did, his eyes were without temperature. 14 dead, Lim said. Jiamingam senior leadership, eliminated without council sanction, without protocol, without a single conversation with this office. He let that sit. For a woman. Tae Yee said nothing. "The faction war you've started will cost us 3 months of port access and 2 years of carefully managed neutrality." Lim folded his hands. "I have spent the last 48 hours negotiating damages on your behalf. You will not thank me for it because you understand, I think, the position you're in." "I understand it." "Then you understand what comes next." Lim nodded toward a document at the table's edge, a renewal contract, the blood oath formalized in syndicate legal language, updated with a single new addendum that Tae Yee read in 4 seconds. Patricia Patrick, named explicitly. Placed under Baekho protection, permanently. Asset classification, acquired dependent. Their property. Dressed in the language of safety. Sign it, Lim said. Swear the renewal. The woman lives comfortably under our umbrella for the rest of her life, the Jeonmungam grievance is formally settled, and you return to your position. A pause. Or don't. And find out what happens to men who destabilize this organization for personal sentiment. The room was very quiet. Tae Yee thought about Patricia on that overlook, the torn papers rising into the dark, the absolute steadiness in her voice when she told him her stars were meant to guide her out. Not into a different cage. Out. He reached into his jacket. Removed the syndicate ring, 10 years of authority compressed into a single band of black and gold, and set it on the table with a sound that was very small for something so final. Lim looked at it. Then at him. Consider carefully. I have, Tae Yee said. He did it in the underground car park 2 levels below, alone, with a lighter and the specific and grueling patience of a man who had decided that pain was the most honest available vocabulary. The flame touched the tattooed skin at his neck, the oath he had carried since 16, the characters that had defined the entire architecture of his adult life, and he held it there until the thing was done. Until the hangul was gone, replaced by a raw, livid scar that would never fully resolve. He did not make a sound. When it was finished, he straightened. Looked at the blank concrete wall in front of him. Ryu Suk was waiting by the car, and when Tae Yee emerged the man looked at the wound on his neck with an expression that passed through several emotions too quickly to name before settling into something that looked, unexpectedly, like grief. Incheon Terminal, Tae Yee said. She leaves tonight. The departure board at Incheon International Terminal cycled through its destinations with mechanical indifference. Chicago. London. Lagos. Dubai. Cities that didn't know her name, didn't hold her debt, didn't carry the particular exhausted weight of the last 2 years. Patricia stood in front of it with her suitcase handle in one hand and her boarding pass in the other, and she felt, not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than relief. The feeling of a person who has survived something and hasn't yet worked out what surviving it means for whatever comes next. Seoul had not been what she planned. She had planned to teach English for a year, save aggressively, and return home with enough to make a dent in her father's debt on her own terms. Instead she had danced in a club in Itaewon, watched her workplace get purchased overnight by a man who thought protection and possession were synonyms, and stood on a mountain in the cold and torn up the only financial salvation she'd ever been offered because it had arrived drenched in other people's blood. She had no regrets about the papers. She had not stopped thinking about him since. That was the part she hadn't worked out how to file away yet, the part where she could simultaneously know she had made the right choice and still feel the specific gravity of a man who had, in his catastrophically misguided way, looked at her situation and decided it was unacceptable. Who had read her father's name in a dossier at 6 in the morning and felt something shift. Whose absolute, terrible methodology she had rejected completely and whose eyes on that overlook, when she'd torn the papers, when she'd walked away, had looked, for the first time since she'd known him, genuinely lost. She picked up her suitcase and turned toward the security queue. Patricia. She heard him before she saw him, the voice stripped of its usual authority, rougher at the edges, carrying something unguarded that she had never heard in it before. He looked nothing like the man from the VVIP balcony. The bespoke suit was gone, replaced by a dark jacket that fit like it had been grabbed rather than chosen. His platinum blonde hair was unset, falling without its usual precision. He was moving through the terminal crowd with the stiff economy of someone managing significant pain, and when he got close enough for the overhead lighting to reach him properly she saw it, the left side of his neck, where the hangul oath had lived for 10 years. Raw. Scarred. Gone. Not covered. Not amended. Removed. Patricia stood very still. Tae Yee stopped in front of her at a distance that wasn't presumptuous, close enough to be heard, far enough to be refused. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing left in it except the truth of what he'd come to say. I know what I did, he said quietly. At the warehouse. I know what it cost. I know you were right to walk away from it, and I'm not here to argue that. He paused. I'm here because I spent 10 years being a man everyone in Seoul had a reason to fear, and I realized, standing on that mountain after you left, that I had never once in those 10 years been a man worth following. His hand moved briefly toward his neck, not touching the scar, just acknowledging it. I burned it away, he said. Not for you. Because you showed me I'd been wearing it like it was the same thing as being alive. His eyes held hers steadily. I have no empire left. No protection to offer. No syndicate infrastructure between me and every consequence of the last month. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. I have a scar and a significant number of enemies and no particular destination. The terminal moved around them, announcements overhead, rolling luggage, the ambient noise of 10,000 people in transit between one life and another. Your stars, Tae Yee said softly. You said they guide you out of the dark. He looked at the constellation on her neck, 5 hollow points that had glowed under the stage lights of the neon lotus the night everything changed. I'm not asking you to carry me. I'm asking if I can walk in the same direction. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. At the scar. At the unguarded face of a man who had dismantled the entire architecture of his existence and was standing in the rubble of it without asking her to call it beautiful. She thought about her father, about Cornelius Patrick, who had loved him perfectly and messily and with his whole chest, who had left her a debt she never resented him for because it was the last evidence of how hard he'd fought to stay. She thought about what clean meant. Whether it was a destination or a direction. She held out her hand. Tae Yee looked at it the way a man looks at something he had stopped believing was available to him. Then he took it, carefully, like something worth being careful with. They walked away from the security queue together, past the departure board with its cycling destinations, out through the terminal's wide glass doors and into the cold Incheon air. No plan. No empire. No oath except the unspoken one being made in the simple fact of two people choosing the same direction. Above them, the sky was beginning to lighten at its edges. Somewhere in it, if you knew how to look, were stars. If you made it all the way to the end, I genuinely want to say thank you. Your time means something, and I appreciate you choosing to spend it here. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends, especially if you want more powerful mafia drama like this. And before you go, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your country right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, stay blessed.